Welcome to Nightfall Sleep Radio. Tonight, let's wander gently through the corridors of history. We'll explore 10 curious little-known facts from across time and place. This isn't studying for any class. There's no reports to write. We only want to wander and drift through the pages of the past. Let's create a calming space where your thoughts can settle. So get cozy, close your eyes, and let's begin. Curious fact number 1. The soldier who didn't know the war had ended. In the dense jungles of the Philippines, there was a man named Hiru Onoda who hid from the world. He believed the Second World War was still raging around him. For nearly 30 years after the surrender, he lived off the land, evading locals and holding to his orders, never surrender. The leaflets dropped from planes didn't convince him that the war was over. Radio broadcasts didn't sway him from his mission. It wasn't until 1974, when his former commanding officer, now a much older man, traveled to the island to release him from duty. Once his former commander arrived, Onoda finally laid down his rifle. Imagine the silence that followed after 3 decades of waiting. The war was over in his mind, and he could finally go home. Curious fact 2. Napoleon's rabbit attack. Napoleon Bonaparte, fresh from a military victory, decided to celebrate his win with a rabbit hunt. His men gathered hundreds of rabbits and released them into a field. But instead of fleeing, the rabbits charged back at the men. These soft, furry creatures were relentless in nibbling at the soldiers' feet. It turns out they weren't wild rabbits at all. They were tame little bunnies from local farmers, and they thought they were going to be fed, not hunted. The great conqueror of Europe was forced to retreat from a horde of fluffy bunnies. Curious fact 3. Cleopatra and the pyramids. We often think of Cleopatra as an ancient queen, and in many ways she was. But the pyramids at Giza were already ancient by the time she came to rule. She was the great ruler of Egypt around 30 BCE, when the Great Pyramid had already stood for 2,500 years. In fact, if you did the math, you'd find she lived closer to our time than to the builders of the pyramids. Her time was closer to the moon landing than to the laying of a single pyramid stone. We sometimes perceive history in curious ways, don't we? Curious fact number 4. The parrot that cursed at a president's funeral. Andrew Jackson was the 7th U.S. president. He was known for his fiery temper, and so it seems was his parrot. At Andrew Jackson's funeral in 1845, his bird, named Pole, had to be removed from the service because it wouldn't stop swearing, loudly and profanely. The mourners that were gathered there were stunned. Some were horrified. Others barely held back their laughter. It was said the parrot had been profoundly disturbed by the crowd. Or maybe it was just a little too inspired by its late owner. Curiosity number 5. When pigs stood trial in court. Back in medieval Europe, justice sometimes took strange forms. Animals could be, and often were, put on trial for various crimes. There are records of pigs standing before judges, accused of theft, or sometimes even worse. One pig in France was sentenced to death in the 14th century for attacking a child. Lawyers were appointed on both sides of the case. Testimony was heard in this dramatic trial, and eventually the sentence was carried out. It's hard to imagine now, but back then, animals were seen as moral actors. They were capable of guilt and punishment and even repentance. What a strange time to be a lawyer or a judge in those days. Curious fact number 6. Samarkand, a city conquered dozens of times. Tucked along the old Silk Road is a city called Samarkand. It was an oasis of turquoise domes and sun-baked stone. Over the centuries, it has changed hands more than 30 times. Alexander the Great once conquered this beautiful place. So did Genghis Khan. The Persians once ruled here, as did the Soviets. And each wave of power left something behind. Beautiful tiled mosaics, minarets, and winding alleyways. Samarkand is more than just a city. It's a mashup of many civilizations. Its buildings and streets are filled with layer upon layer of stories. Curious fact 7. The secret of how Romans did their laundry. In ancient Rome, laundromats were called foulonicae. Just like today, they had places where people could take their clothing and linens for cleaning. However, Roman laundromats held a hidden secret. The foulonicae were loud, smelly, and oddly scientific. Their workers used urine to clean clothes. Why? Because urine contains ammonia, a powerful cleanser. People even placed collection jars on the street to gather it. And yes, there was a tax on this golden commodity. The Emperor Vespasian famously taxed the public urinals. To this day, in parts of Europe, public toilets are still nicknamed Vespasians in his honor. That's a strange tribute, isn't it? Curiosity number 8. The world's shortest war. On August 27, 1896, the Anglo-Zanzibar War began. It all started when the Sultan of Zanzibar defied British demands. A small British naval fleet opened fire and launched a war. But less than 40 minutes later, the palace was in ruins. The Sultan had fled, and the war was over. It was history's shortest war. It began and ended in the 9 a.m. hour, before most people had even finished their morning tea. Curious history number 9. A girl, a typhoon, and the Mongol invasion. In 1281, the Mongol Empire sent a massive fleet to invade Japan. However, a young woman named Tora Gozin stood out. She was fearless, poised, and skilled in combat. She led a warrior troop against the landing forces, and they refused to yield. Despite her bravery, it wasn't swords or strategy that saved Japan. It was the wind. There was a colossal typhoon that struck during the invasion. It scattered the Mongol ships and sank many of them. The storm was named Kamikaze, meaning divine wind. And Tora became a legend as a guardian of her homeland And finally, we come to curiosity number 10. The Eiffel Tower grows every year. On warm summer days in Paris, a fascinating thing occurs. The Eiffel Tower grows. It happens because the steel expands in heat, and the structure can stretch upwards by 6 to 7 inches. Then at night, as the air cools, it slowly begins to contract again. Even this massive monument breathes with the seasons. As we drift back toward the present, it's easy to see that the past is not just dates and names. It can be strange and shifting and full of quiet marvels, like drifting sand or a hazy mist. The past settles around us, asking for nothing, just waiting to be remembered. As we let the stories fade away, let silence guide you to a gentle rest. Allow your breath to be slow and steady, and your body still and relaxed. Allow gentle sleep to find you and drift into peaceful dreams. This has been Nightfall Sleep Radio. Sleep well.